everybody. Welcome to More Than You Can Handle. It's me, your host, Jeremy Alder, and my guest today is a very funny comedian out of not North Carolina, out of New York City,
Well, I appreciate that.
Liz Glazer.
Thank you. Hold on. You're not going to say my name without me cutting you off at least 3 times. But thank you, Jeremy. But I appreciate that you say that you were going to say out of North Carolina because, first of all, that is where we met.
Yes.
Second of all, I love, I'm not a huge traveler, but when I travel, I like to integrate into wherever I am. And I feel like that saying I'm from North Carolina, where you're from, is a huge compliment that I'm going to interpret as such, even if it was, I don't want to say Freudian slip because I don't think that Freud would have much to say about my being from North Carolina or New Jersey, New York area, wherever. But to the extent he did, I'm not an expert in Freud. I just want that on the record. There's a lot of debate about that. And
Oh, no, that's why I brought you on.
Exactly. So here's what I have to say about my relationship with Freud. He's my mother, and I wanted to have sex with him. But thank you. And it was great when we met in North Carolina, where I was from that day.
Yes.
That
Well,
we
you
met.
you did a great job
Thank you.
fitting
And
right
you.
in. Yeah, thank you.
It
Thank
was
you. I'm
so
also not
fun.
from here originally, so
Yeah.
we both done a great job. I'm
Yeah.
so happy to have you on the podcast.
Happy to be here.
I want to start by saying congratulations on the new album, A Very Particular Experience, which
Thanks.
is an extraordinary listening experience.
Thank
It is a
you.
very, very unique, very particular type of comedy album that
hmm
deals with um, death head on.
hmm Yeah.
And it is just bravo, really
Thanks.
fantastic
Thank
job.
you.
And
Thank you.
more about kind of your process around that.
Sure.
Um,
Happy to. Yeah.
yeah. But first, tell me a little bit about your background, in particular, any
hmm
religion or spirituality that you grew up with.
Yeah. So, religion for me, growing up, I was raised going to Orthodox Jewish day school and a conservative Jewish synagogue. And now I'm married to a Reform Jewish rabbi. So I think overall I'm Catholic, is what that means. And um, but that's all true. And I guess
Uh-huh.
the kind of those are the on paper points, right? Everything I've
Yeah.
said except for the I'm Catholic is true. Not that there's anything wrong with Catholicism. My mother-in-law who converted to Judaism was raised Catholic, and I have many Catholic friends. I sound like I'm defending something. This is really about Freud, I think, is what I mean. But so I was like really Jewish growing up. We didn't meet at this event, you and I. We met at our mutual friend and amazing comedian in person, Helen Wilde's album recording.
hmm
And the next night after we met, we did a JCC together.
hmm
Um, and remember that joke that was about the Jewish Community College? I should post that.
Yes.
I have that
Yes.
on
You
tape.
should.
So
You should.
yeah. But
That
anyway,
was my
so
first JCC
yeah, you did so great.
experience. It
And
was so fun.
well, I think it highlighted the fact that you integrated into that community and experience like as well as you did, which was very, is like that religion, even in its particulars, is generalizable and relatable in a general way. And
hmm
so despite the fact that everybody in there, the room for that show at the JCC was Jewish, they could relate to experiences relating to religion. And I guess,
Yeah.
you know, I had the experience of inner, like, literal conflict because I went to Orthodox school, but I was not as observant as everybody in my school or most of the people who went to my school at home. So
Mm.
we would learn Monday through Friday everything we were doing wrong at home. on the weekends. Like that was the education. And so it's like, I went to school, I learned, oh, you don't eat non-kosher, you don't go out on Shabbat. Meanwhile, Friday night, we're going to Rudy's Pizza getting pepperoni, right? And by the way, taking it home to our kosher house. Our house was kosher, which by the way, I mean, no disrespect to my mother, who I love very much. That woman, Toby Glazer, loves herself some China, okay? And I think that the reason that she was like, I'm all in on kosher is because you get more China. So she's like, I get the Passover meat and milk and fancy and not fancy, and the regular meat and milk and fancy and not. Oh yeah, and parov, which parov is neither meat nor milk. So like fruits, vegetables are parov. You can have parov dishes too if you so choose, and she did. Okay, so it's a lot of dishes in the game.
Okay.
In
Yeah.
being kosher, and so I grew up, where in the home versus out of the home was a meaningful distinction in terms of like, this is what we eat in the house versus out. Oh, and the reason I said we took it home, the pepperoni pizza. So you might wonder, okay, so pepperoni pizza, not kosher.
Yeah.
Taking it home is kosher. What do? Treif dishes. Treif is a Yiddish word that means not kosher. Okay.
Okay.
And so pork is for sure treif. Shellfish, meat with milk, treif, okay? And you can't put that on the dishes because that changes the dishes, okay? Because then they're no good.
Yeah.
So we had special treif silverware and dishes. So it was a whole dish game.
So there were plans to repeatedly break kosher, and you prepared for it with special dishes.
Correct. And the thing is, it's not like, my parents, first of all, so they're all descended from Holocaust survivors. 4 out of 4 Holocaust survivors, perfect score, okay, for all grandparents. And then my parents are children of Holocaust survivors, I think bound together by their mutual anxiety. I don't think anybody would have understood that more than them. And that was their like love connection primarily, in my opinion. Okay. But they didn't send me and my brother to Jewish day school because they wanted us to come out religious necessarily. They wanted us to, quote, know who you are, like, and really have a sense of your ethnic background. And I say ethnic because they're coming from Holocaust survivors. And so for them, the Jewish identity was less about davening 3 times a day or keeping kosher or doing all these like rules, and more about, listen, if there's, God forbid, Nazis coming after us, you know who you are. And I say it with those stakes because that's like really the mentality that I think they had. Because for their parents, that was it. My mother was born in a displaced persons camp. My father, came from Riga as a refugee to Israel, okay? And that's where the rest of his family still is. And then he was like, this sucks. I'm going to New York with my friend Yash. That's the thing, is like, that's my religious identity, is like the paranoia of like, oh my God, did I do something wrong? Did I say something wrong? And I think that that's like what has changed for me in adulthood. Well, not that much because I still am this paranoid, but in sort of my choice about spirituality and religion. And so first of all, I'm married to a Reform rabbi. So there's a lot of synagogue in my life. There's a lot of Jewish community in my life. I do shows, for synagogues, for JCCs, things like that. And I love them. And I love, doing, like, working on stuff in that environment because it's so close to my childhood and upbringing and what I know. And also, first of all, my rabbi is my wife, and she is a Reform rabbi. And I think Reform Judaism versus conservative or Orthodox, in my experience and opinion, is like way more about like kindness and loving each other. And I'm like, this is a great religion. What did you say it was? Oh, Judaism? Sorry, I didn't learn it that way. Like, because that's the thing.
Sure.
You know, and I have a joke on my album that I think fits this. It's really about my parents-in-law and about how good of people they are, which is really true. And they're always like volunteering at soup kitchens and stuff like that. And I wasn't raised that way. And on the album, you know, my brother laughs at that. And I call him out for laughing at it because, you know, we weren't raised that way. And then I had a line of like, yeah, we were raised like, if this soup kitchen doesn't give me AP credit, I'm not coming, because that's the kind of environment I was raised in. And I don't think it's because my parents were like, you know, obsessed people with like career. I think for them it was survival. Right? For them, it was, listen, you have to have a profession because you don't know when somebody is going to kick us out and we're not going to know what to do. And we got to go somewhere and we have to have something to fall back on.
Right.
And that's the stuff of my background that very much has been upended in my adulthood, even though I'm still in a Jewish world. But it's a very different Jewish world from what I knew from school and growing up.
So given your parents' kind of survival mentality and desire for you to have a steady, stable career, I can't imagine they were thrilled about the turn to stand-up comedy, or how did they feel about it? Because that's you didn't start out as a comic. You have a background as a lawyer and a law professor, right?
Yeah. So I think now, well, first of all, my dad is dead, so he's thrilled about it. And no, but like he saw me. I think probably he wishes that he saw me, you know, do the Tonight Show or something where it's like, now I can really go out on a bang. And I feel bad that I'm not as successful as what he might have liked to have seen before he departed this plane. And I mean that. But also, like, I think he got, by the time he died, that I was in it and, you know, progressing in a way that he felt I was going to be okay. The last time I saw him was on a Zoom comedy show for my parents' synagogue. And I actually, I just am, I mean, I knew that, but like, you know, as I was just describing it, I remembered it. I made fun of my parents for social distancing, like on their own accord, because in the Zoom screen, and this is really just the way the room with the computer is set up, my dad was on one end of a couch and my mother was like clear on the other end of the room, you know, at the computer. And it just was like such a perfect visual in that way. Yeah. And it was right when, this was like April 2020, that my parents' synagogue, you know, had me on to do a Zoom comedy show. And I think it may have been one of the first synagogues I did, actually, and now I do them quite frequently and enjoy them. I hope we get to do another one, by the way, whether in North Carolina or otherwise. And I may come back, because you remember Phyllis from that show?
Oh man, I met a lot of people.
No, the woman who said that the background looked like a Holocaust thing.
Yeah. Yes.
So and just for listeners, like basically there was a screen behind us, me and Jeremy. And during my set, it was a computer screen projected onto the back of the stage. And it looked like a brick wall because the shul and the JCC were trying to create a comedy show. To their credit, they did a really nice job of like making this room in a JCC look like a comedy show. And anyway, and then the computer at one point just fizzes out and the screen is gone. And I have such ADD on stage, you know, for better or for worse. And I was just like, oh wait, what happened? And then, you know, the guy, Jack, who like put together the whole thing was like, oh, we're getting it resolved. And he was doing such a great job and whatever. And I was like, okay, but I'm still going to talk about it. And then this woman, Phyllis, in classic JCC person's named Phyllis Fashion raises her hand. She's like, well, I didn't much care for the background, because of course. And then she's like, in my opinion, it looks like the Holocaust. And she just drops the Holocaust. And then I went back to her because it's this room with these huge cinder block walls, not that wall that was projected onto the screen, but rather the actual permanent walls of the room. And I'm like, Phyllis, you're saying this brick wall, very clearly to look like a comedy club, looks like the Holocaust. Meanwhile, look to your right, left, up, down. The whole place is like Yad Vashem. You know, I mean, it's so Holocausty. And so anyway, so we had this whole exchange during the show. And then she emails me because she's like, hey, might you want to come back to do our Shalom Club for the 50 plus whatever set of people in her community, which we're currently figuring out. So I'm going to ask them if you can come back with me, because that was so fun.
Oh, I would love to.
Let's do it.
Let me just say, I'm so glad that exchange happened during your set and not mine. I'm not sure how I would have handled that.
Oh my God. Right? Yeah. That's hilarious, Jeremy. Yeah, it was just such a funny exchange.
It was.
And like just really made the evening.
Oh, for sure.
Or like took it to like this other level where it was like, oh, now, you know, I love those types of moments in a show, because even if like you have a show, you do your material, it all lands beautiful, we're done. And then if there's a moment like that, then it's like, oh, well, that you had to be there for.
Yeah,
and that's
right.
the stuff that I really love about, you know, live comedy, is just that there's the being in the room piece, but then there's also this stuff that only could have happened in this moment that we were all gathered together. And
Sure.
by the way, I think that is spiritual, right? Because that's what I was saying is like, you know, with kind of going from my background in Judaism to my now ground in Judaism, is I think more about the like community, loving kindness, that kind of stuff, which again, I mean, nobody when I was growing up was talking about any of that stuff. You know, it's like, I mean, and I'm not trying to rag on either Orthodox or conservative Judaism, because I'm just not. And also, by the way, when I do Orthodox or conservative places, I talk about these differences, you know, sometimes anyway, when I'm doing sets in those environments, because it's so funny to me that that's what Judaism is. Meanwhile, my Judaism was like, here are things to do, here are things not to do, be careful, be kosher, you know, don't go out on Saturday. You know, and I love a rule. I mean, you're right that I grew up, I was a lawyer and a law professor, so rules I have a relationship to, you know, very much so.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway.
Did your parents think you were funny?
Yes. Yeah. My parents, first of all, my dad, I would do impressions of my dad for my dad. And he loved that. And I remember seeing Margaret Cho as a kid, because I didn't have like really a lot of comedy influences, because I very much like didn't mean to get into it. And I was teaching already for 7 years. I had just gotten tenure as a professor. And that was the moment that I did comedy. So I didn't like have a vision of me as a comedian at all. Okay. But I remember Margaret Cho on TV when I was a kid. I'm 43. So whatever that, you know, however that timeline shakes out. And this was her earlier stuff when she was doing a lot of impressions of her Korean parents. And I remember seeing that on TV and I was like, oh my God, that's what I do in front of my dad. Because my dad was like super foreign sounding. And I know that there's, you know, obviously now a lot of debate about like whether you do an accent or you don't do an accent. Let me tell you, I was killing at, you know, the dinner table doing my dad for my dad. And up to the day he died, he's like, you should talk more about me and your materials. Like this was what he wanted for me. And meanwhile, he's like, why do you have to tell everybody how gay you are all the time? And I think, you know, I don't know that I 100% agree with him about not doing that and doing, you know, like me just getting on stage doing some accent basically is like what he thought was hilarious, because it was. That was like for us at home, it was like really funny because I did a really good impression of him.
And it was rooted in love.
Yes, of course.
For him. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
100%. And
Yeah.
so anyway, and I don't do it, I do it a little bit of my dad, but it's not like a ton, and it's certainly not like the backbone of my material, although, maybe for the next hour, we'll just call it questionable accents. But yeah, like I don't remember what the question was,
I
but
just
oh
asked if
yeah,
your parents thought you were
yeah.
funny. Yeah.
Yeah, and my mom is really funny. My dad was also really funny, but my dad was funny like he was just him, and
Hmm.
that was funny. My mother has good comedic timing, and she's telling stories, she's landing punchlines, like she's good. And I think if she ever wanted to, could be a comedian, because you know she can take, and I aspire to this, the most like little customer service story, about an interaction about with a exterminator, and have it be the funniest, most interesting thing you've heard all day.
Yeah.
And I mean, we both do clean comedy,
Hmm.
perhaps not exclusively, but we do a lot of it. And I do it because to me that's close to what I am in real life.
Hmm.
It's not to say I never curse. It's not to say I never talk about topics that would be considered whatever on a Motion Picture Association of America rating thing of over PG. But being even G rated is fine for me because I am a lot in my actual life.
Mm.
And I think, I don't know, people have lots to say about being clean, being not, but I think like if somebody listening is a comedian who, you're looking at what you actually say in your regular life and you're like, I am pretty clean, do corporates and do synagogues and stuff like that, because you really can go pretty far, I think,
Oh, sure.
being able to do that. I
Yeah.
think it's just like a muscle. But again, I mean, some people, it's like really a big jump from what they normally are like. And so in that setting, I would say otherwise. But for me, it's fine.
Do you think growing up religious is what made you kind of generally a clean person? Like,
Maybe.
yeah.
I don't know. Probably
Yeah.
it had an effect. But I think what's also true is like my real like things that excite me to talk about have always been, what's the meaning of life? Why
Mm.
are we here? How does time work? Like all of these questions of the universe have always been what I actually care to talk about, much more than dating
Mm.
and relationships and stuff like that, that tend to enter into areas that are more graphic or dirty or something.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really what it is. But yeah, I mean, I'm willing to, like, I don't know exactly what had what influence, but I feel like it was more that. It was more
Yeah.
like I was always very interested in exploring why I am the way that I am, why other people are the way that they are, interactions that have felt like funny and strange to me. And also I'm not 100% clean
Sure.
at all.
Yeah.
And so, there are certain jokes that I wouldn't do in certain situations because, it's like clean can mean a lot of things, because it's like I have a joke about what my parents reacted when I said that I wanted to be a comedian, and my mother was like, what are you going to do for money? And I was like, well, I could prostitute. And that's 100% true that I said that. And I have a bit about it on stage. I wouldn't say that in certain situations where the cleanliness of the show has been communicated to me, that even the intimation, that whole joke is about how I would be a terrible prostitute, incidentally,
Right.
okay?
Right.
Or sex worker, whatever. That's the whole thing of the joke. And so, but it's still dirty because you're having to engage the thought of prostitution, right?
Hmm.
And I get that. I get that, like, in some situations, that's just not what the vibe is
Yeah.
of the show.
Right.
And that's fine.
Yeah.
So the reason I was mentioning it in the context of my mother is because my mother and I talk all day long, thank God. And it's like about I mean, by the way, right now she's going through a thing where, did you know? I don't know if this is true, but apparently, so she had some guy over to the house. Well, that's true, but and not like a suitor, but like a contractor or some such. And he's saying, by the way, you have a passageway where chipmunks are going into your house. And so then she's like, I'm going to call an exterminator. The exterminator is like, we can't do anything about the chipmunks because they're an endangered species. And I'm like, what? So you're basically a zoo at this point because I've been to your house. I grew up at your house. There's a lot of chipmunks around there. And anyway, then she's calling the town and she's calling back the exterminator, and I don't know if he's going to do it, and who charges what. And this could go on, Jeremy, I'm not even like a week of conversations. Okay, take me through each step of this customer service problem. And that's what we love. I don't know if that's not spiritual or religious. It's definitely Jewish in a cultural sense, because then it's like, oh, well, one exterminator, he only charges $20 because he's 80 years old and he does it to do something. And then my mother's like, the cleaning lady makes more than this exterminator. So we go on forever. And there's some stuff on the album about, returning, which is something
that is hilarious story. That is a hilarious story on the album. I love that so much.
I have been returning items for my mother longer than I've been doing anything else. Like, I think, first of all, I'm a lawyer. My mother, not a lawyer, is a better lawyer than I am because of all of the customer service stuff that she's done. I mean, you should see these letters. It's like I've had to rein my mother in because I'm like, are you trying to get this person fired? You know what I mean? Because it's just such a good letter, and you're not wrong, but like, let's massage some of this, finesse the language a little bit. So we've been in business, my mother and I, returning items since, it's got to be, for me, at least 1984. Okay? So, yeah.
Yes, with a very high success rate, it sounds like,
Yeah.
whether you are right or not.
Right. I know.
So you mentioned always being kind of enthralled with these bigger questions of the meaning of life and who you are as a person. Have you found Judaism to be no? But have you found Judaism to be helpful or satisfying in that regard?
No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
Well, I think that as I've come to be more involved in Reform Judaism through my wife, that lines up more for me with stuff that's connected to that. Okay. For me, that's a little bit more the meaning of life, because I feel like there's more of a focus on, again, like being kind to each other, having gratitude. And I think, there was one time somebody asked me, and then asked me anything on Instagram, what is the meaning of life? And I don't know if you've ever had these experiences where I'm just like writing and I'm like, am I writing this? Because it feels like it's coming through me. And I don't know what that means. I'm not saying I'm a prophet or whatever. I'm not saying not, but but I have found, by the way, over 150 Chinese cookie fortunes on the ground. And I do have a spreadsheet about those. So I'm just saying, I don't know. It's a wild thing. It started in 2017. And of course, I understand, I'm well versed in skepticism to know, oh, there's that German named hypothesis about, if you are aware of it, then you're going to see it, red car, and then there's going to be one. Oh, I'm literally looking at one right now, right? I get it. And also 150, okay, of these things, and I didn't put them there. I do hang out and live near a Chinese restaurant, but no, I'm kidding. But anyway, one time I was answering on Instagram and somebody says, what's the meaning of life? And I was like, the meaning of life is to figure out how to be grateful for it. And I do believe that there's something to that. And again, I'm joking about the prophet stuff, unless anybody wants to follow me and I'll start a religion, and that's fine too. But I really think that if there's nothing more that I operated from than that would be fine. Is like, this stuff happened and is happening to you. how can you be grateful for it? And with respect to the album, so the album, as you know, arises from the stillbirth of my and my wife's first daughter, Leo Pearl, of blessed memory. And that happened to us on the 1 year prior to the day of the recording of the album. So it happens November 10th of 2021. November 10th of 2022 is when I recorded the album. And I am not grateful that we had a stillbirth, because that sentence just on its own is a lot for me to say, because it's just like, I don't know how I can get to that. However, that experience definitely raised my level of empathy. I mean, what a challenge it was to me as a comedian, because I was, first of all, before the stillbirth happened, I was getting ready to record an album about how my wife was pregnant. And I had all of these, my wife is pregnant, basically jokes that I was going to put on this other album. And I'm working now on a documentary about that album, the cancellation of it, everything that happens, the new album, etc. And so that's an exciting project, which will be called Stillborn Sorry, because the original album was supposed to be called Born Sorry, and then this is Stillborn Sorry, a pun that is too good to leave on the table, even though it's like so tragic. But so look out for that if anybody's looking out for stuff. And also, I always like to fold in the say your stuff if I can in the interview. So dearlizglazer.com if you're looking for me. But I'm not grateful that that happened. And also the fact that it happened caused me to contend with the extent to which I could be honest in my comedy. Because I mean, I was pretty happy as a non-comedian. Like, I was happy as a law professor, and I had a job forever. It was a steady, great job that I liked. And then I did stand-up, and I was like, oh, there's a level of honesty that I can get to when I don't have to cover, material about property law and prepare students for the bar or whatever, that I was happy to do when that was my job. But then when I didn't have to do it, I was like, oh my God, what if class was just about me, right? And the level of honesty that brought into my life was unparalleled, and that's the reason that I jumped ship. And the challenge, I think, as a comedian is then once you get better at it, you also get a little bit worse at least this was my experience, at the being myself part of it. Because as you get better, or as I've gotten better, I've become better at crafting a joke, landing a punchline, etc., and maybe less good at times at just sounding like I sound in regular conversation and just saying the truth, that then the punchline falls right out of your mouth because it's funny, but it's not like you have to try hard to land it.
Right.
And I think that the challenge specifically of like an event like this, where you're like, am I ever going to be funny again? And what kind of funny do I want to be when I'm talking about this? Because I'm not going to like make an album of yucks about, stillbirth. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to say something. And I wanted to honor our daughter's memory with something that was worthy of it and that made the experience of this, which of course was horrible, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. I don't wish it happened, and I'm not exactly grateful for it, but make it worthwhile.
Did you ever think comedy might not be the best medium for that? Or were you like, no, I think turning this into shared laughter is exactly what this needs? Like,
well, it's a good question. I mean, one is I was a comedian already when this happened.
Right.
And I don't think that the label of it makes that much of a difference, but for the fact that I was specifically worried that I would never work again. after this happened because I'm like,
Mm.
how am I going to be honest and do the thing that I've been on this path for some years now that seems to be going pretty okay?
Mm-hmm.
And am I just going to like get off this path because this happened? That doesn't seem like the right thing. And then I think to the credit of comedians such as Tig Notaro, Mike Birbiglia, Hannah Gadsby before me, and I'm not endeavoring to compare myself to them at all. Maria Bamford, obviously, like people who take hard stuff and go in
Yeah.
and make it funny. I was like, okay, well, there is a path. So I can choose to go on that path and, endeavor to make something great because I have these great role models before me to look up to.
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of it was that. And also part of it was I have these stories and jokes on the album, but like that there are moments in grief that humor has been the thing that has united, my family and the people around me. And also I think the third thing is when I was literally in the hospital with my wife when Leo's stillbirth occurred, funny things started happening and I was like, I guess I should write them down. And and I had this file entitled Way Too Soon that was that, file of jokes essentially.
How did your wife feel about that?
She gets it. I mean,
Wow.
so she did her Yom Kippur sermon about this experience, and her Yom
Mm.
Kippur sermon was a Yom Kippur sermon. It was not a comedy act. So in that sense, we're different. But I mean, she sent me a video, like the day after the album came out, and it was like we taped each other in the hospital the day of the stillbirth, just reacting to like what was going on and whatever. And I said something, and she's like, "Did you watch this? Because in this video, you basically lay out what became the album." And it was basically like, I want to figure out a way to laugh because right now I'm worried that I never will. And if somebody else is in this position, God forbid, then maybe, they too can look to this as like, I'm going to be okay and I'm going to be able to be a laughing person again. Because for me, I mean, now I'm a comedian, so laughs are this like commodity, right?
Mm.
But like before I was a comedian, I was just being funny. And I try to remember that because ultimately I think that that's the voice and the real stuff that's like the most valuable to bring into comedy to begin with is like the way you were funny before you realized that that was like what you were trying to be.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It's always funnier when you're not trying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hard for me because I'm so try-y.
Well, I just have to say again that the album is extraordinary, and
Thanks, Jeremy.
I mean, you really, it seems like you accomplished what you set out to do. I mean, it's
Thank you.
really, it's a comedy album, but it's more than that, and it's really
Thanks.
beautiful. Yeah. So, listeners out there, please find it, check it out.
Yeah, please.
It's available everywhere
Yeah,
now, right? Anywhere
yeah,
you
it
can
is.
stream it.
Hmm.
It's really great.
Thanks, Jeremy. I
Yeah.
really
How do you feel? Like, do you feel good about it? Like when you were
do.
done, were you like, oh yeah,
Oh
I
yeah.
did it, I nailed it.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, yeah, and that's a tough thing I think to say about at least me about
Mm-hmm.
myself.
Yeah.
Um, but I really was just like, yep, I think this is what I want. This is
Mm.
what I want to do. And also like this is the thing that I'm comfortable putting out so that I can move on.
Yeah.
In my work and also in my grief.
Yeah. Where were you working out this material? Like, this is some heavy stuff. Were you just going
Yeah.
to regular open mics around the city?
I did do open mics and those were valuable because, in an open mic, you could do whatever you want. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter. And I had like some kind of like, I call them sweatpants shows where it's like, it's a show, but like, come on.
Yeah.
Um, and I think comedians will know what I mean, and other people, it's like, when it's free and there's three people in the audience and there's a smell and where's it coming from? Like that's a sweatpants show. Okay. So I really relished those bookings as I was working out this material. I also like, now I've started headlining clubs, which is amazing to me that's where I'm at. But I also like I would offer to feature for people and stuff like that. And of course, like there's, a delicate balance. Like I'm not going to feature for someone and be like, I got to work out some stillbirth stuff.
Right.
So yeah, it is hard. But I also knew, I was like, the number of actual stillbirth jokes is not that many. But there's death jokes. And I was like, okay, well, in what I want to say, I want to talk about this thing that happened with like my dad's death. And let me tell you, there's nothing like a stillbirth to make your 73-year-old father's death from heart disease suddenly become your lighter material. Okay? Because that's what happened, and all of a sudden, because when my dad died, I was like, oh my God, how am I going to talk about death? And, I did. First of all, he died during the pandemic. So that was like Zoom shows. And, most of them were a little bit, who cares? Definitely sweatpants shows, if that. They were probably underwear shows.
Right.
And so I did that there. And then some of those jokes and stories, I was like, oh, this is like totally fine. Like my mom and me measuring tombstones. I'm like, that's fine, So it kind of was like this experience of the stillbirth led to being more comfortable with some of the stuff I thought was difficult to talk about before.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Has this experience had you reflecting differently on your own death?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that it has brought to my attention more than anything else the privilege of aging and the passage of time on its own. And so I internalize that kind of achievement mentality. I was never young and hot. And so as a result of that, I've never cared about getting older. And I say that because like if you're a young, hot person, I get why, if that's been your identity, that you'd be really annoyed at aging. But like for me, I'm like, nobody was casting me when I was young. I think I've always looked like someone who will grow into a role. And so as a result of that, I've never cared about aging. Because I'm like, yeah, let the gray hairs come in. I think I look better. First of all, I asked a hairdresser when I was 22 years old to dye my hair salt and pepper. Okay. And my mother, who was with me, I think slipped the woman some cash to tell me that would make my hair fall out. And so then I didn't do it. But now I feel like you can't see it 100%, but I'm pretty salt and pepper. I definitely have gray hair. And I love it. I'm not going to dye it. Are you kidding? So I worked for this. And I think that stillbirth in particular and other untimely death, has caused me to appreciate life. Like just the living of it. Doesn't matter what happened. Like, because, my daughter didn't get to do this,
Right.
And so who am I to be like, ugh, I'm getting old, or ugh, today sucks. I mean, it's fine, but like if I'm really searching, like that's, I think, what I mean about the meaning of life is to figure out how to be grateful for it.
When did you figure that out? And how?
I mean, other than answering that guy on Instagram who totally sent me the question as a joke. He's a wonderful comedian. His name is Natan Badalov, and I really think he was asking it as a joke. And I've told him about this exchange. I'm like, I really think you changed my life. He's like, what? I don't even remember. No, he probably doesn't remember, but he's great. But anyway, I feel it's a good question. I've always tried to see something positive because I grew up, my parents were very funny and are very funny. and have that kind of sense of humor of like everything sucks. And it's funny. And that's a lot of people's senses of humor. And I think because I grew up in a lot of that, I was like, I don't think it does. And I wonder if we could still be funny and not have that opinion. And so I've really tried, not even as a comedian, just in my life, of like, can I be funny and also not think everything's the worst? Because I don't think everything's the worst in my real life. I mean, first of all, I am living like such my dream life, okay? These trees are not a Zoom background. Like, I love it, okay? And I want to be able to love things and to be funny. And I think comedians such as Maria Bamford, Mike Kaplan, they're really great, in my opinion, about like searching for joy and comedy, which often comes from ugh.
Well, speaking of loving things, I know we're going to wrap up here soon, but I like to give guests an opportunity to talk about what are you loving right now? Is there any, could be a book or a movie or a song, something that's just been really particularly meaningful to you that you'd want to share for others?
I'm loving, my wife and I are binge watching Couples Therapy on Hulu Showtime. It's so good. And you don't even have to feel bad. I mean, except I guess for the Hulu or Showtime subscription. But it's not a writer's strike thing because nobody wrote it, which I get. Maybe that's worse. I don't know. It's documentary, and we've tried to find a couples therapist. I talk about it on the album a little bit, but like we tried to find a couples therapist and like we still haven't. This woman is amazing. Orna something or another, Goralnik, I think. It's the best show. And my wife is super pregnant right now, so binge watching a show is great because it's like the only thing that gets her mind off how uncomfortable she is physically. Because like 9-month mark, it's bad.
Wow. Well, that's wonderful. Congratulations. That's great. And thank you for that recommendation. My wife and I are looking for a couples therapist too. So
yeah.
And we love watching shows together, so I think this might be
it's so
our
good.
next binge.
And we started from the beginning. I mean, we were like, another one. Like, we can't stop. It's so good.
That's great. All right. Well, Liz, thank you so much.
Jeremy,
this has been
thank you.
Great. One more time before we wrap up, where can people find you and find your stuff?
Yeah, totally. My address is, no, I'm kidding. dearlizglazer.com, like you're writing me a letter, and that links to all of my socials, which are basically at Liz Glazer, except for Twitter, which was at Elizabeth Glazer, but I'm told that, so my Twitter was hacked, so it's not me. But somebody was like, hey, do you know that your Twitter is putting out like hourly tweets about cryptocurrency? Which anyone who knows me knows that I would only tweet about cryptocurrency max once a day. But no, it's totally not me. And I don't know how Bitcoin works, let alone a dollar. But anyway, so Dear Liz Glazer is the best way. And then at Liz Glazer on like most of the other socials.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Liz. I hope to see you again soon.
Me too.